Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1887, Suba Kawaktha, Othandi Hawa, Golden K Stable, Se Guzati, Hui Purani, Lakti K, Darwazan Ko Hiloti Thi, Kol Walker Adalaban, Kat Darwaza, Dhaka, Diahath, Main Lantern, or Enderkadumra, Uski Zindagi, Akalapan, Main Itni, Der Guzar, Kuki Thika Suba, Ki Rawani, Main Surf Godin, Ki Sans, or Kodari, Zaman Ki, Awaz, Sun, Ki Adetsa, Likinus Din, USN Kutch, or Dekat, Stables K Kone, Main Ek, Orat, Podi Thi, Apni, Choti, Si Betty, Ko, Bohan, Main Lai Hugh, Dono Purain, Tink K Bystar Par, Gary Ninde, Nain Dub, Hugh, Orat, Ki Shul Fati Hui Fi, Kab the Miti Sehul He Hui Cherpar Bukor Fikang Genishan, Sof, Nazar, 8, the Uski Angin, Kulgayin, JC Kul, Ka Saya, Uspar Pada or Usun, Epni Betty K Oracus Ke Jopta, please, Humine Mat, Nicolo, Usen, Thatharati, Awaz, Main Kaha, Kolruk, Gaia, Uska Cheralantan Ki Roshni, Main Chamka, Sakt, or Komosh, Uski Awa Asgeritai, Likin Persukun, Tum Yahan Me Fuso Aurat adalah Hikjahat, sejawab dia, Mera, Nam, Clara High, the Mary Betty, Annie, Kolni Surf Ek, Choti, Sigurse Dek Kar, Sahil, Osklai Ziada, Sowel Kana, Zirori Nahitha, USN Deka Kadono Cab, Se Book that Usne Ek Purana, Kabdeka Bandel Utaya, Jismasoda, Sayaroti Thi Oran Semen Rakdea, Clara Pehele, Toh Sarmayi, Lekin Eni, Ki Choti Ungliroti, Ki Tarafbar, Gai, Ma Kadil Hargaya Oranhon Apni Betty Kayo Kalia, Kol Chup Chop Anadek, Rahath, Hais Kudbi Herenho, Ku Senan Anda, Rendaya, USN Bus, Itna Pucha, Kahan Yarahi Ho, Clara Ni Nietzsche Dekt, Hu Kaha Jahan B, Wo, Banka Humin, Na, Dund Pa, The Laughs Kol K, Dilpa Sida Chup Gay, Kun K, Wo Kud, B Samashta, Tha Kekas, Or Kun Q Boj, Kis Terra, Insan Ko, Todd, Deet, Hain, Uson Unpani Dia, Or Kaha Pilo, Fiaga, Kitaraf, Shelu Clara, Adala Turant Manakarna Shaha, Humboj Nahibana Chat, Kol Kia was Sakt, Likin Bilkul, Thik Thi, Tumpehel Hai, Banchuko, Abi Saitarabanadu, Ek Palke, Layanki, Ankan Mili, Clara Ki, Onkan, Main Thakan, or Dertha, Likan Soth, Hayek Chupi, Hui Himat, B, Kol K Chair Pa, Wo Parana Sakt, Lahutha, Likanusk, Dilmain, Kuchhilla, Anini Apni, Make, Kanda Pa, Sarak, Karjamhaili, or Kol Niapni Nazar, Fiali, Likananda, Se Usne Mezus Kia K, Ye Orat, or Ye Bochi Usk Akalapan, Ki Kamoshi, Ko Tod Chuki Hain, Clara Ni Dia Se Kaha, Bus Ekrot, Kaushuba Shalija Yingi, Kol, adalah Jawab Nahidia, Surf Ek, Parana Campbell Unk, Pos Raka, or Stable Se Bahar Chaldea, Likin Highs Hai Hawa Ni Darwazi, Ki Darar, Se Siti, USN Samaj Lia K, Ya Safar Bus, Ekrot Tak, Sematni Walla, Nahitha. The wind had picked up by the time Cole guided Clara and Annie from the stable toward his ranch house, the lantern in his hand threw long shadows across the yard, bending with the gusts, dancing over the split-rail fence and the rough-hewn logs of the cabin. Clara hesitated at the threshold, her daughter's small fingers tangled in her skirt. Cole pushed the door open without ceremony, the hinges groaning, and motioned them inside. The cabin was plain but warm stone hearth smoldering, shelves stacked with jars of beans and flour, the faint smell of leather and pine sap lingering in the air. Clara's eyes darted around nervously, as if stepping into the home of a stranger was a trespass she'd regret. Cole set the lantern down, removed his hat, and muttered, "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the wooden chair like she might spring up and leave any moment. Annie, unafraid, clambered onto the seat beside her, wide eyes roving the room. Her voice broke the silence. "Do you live here all alone, Mr. Cole paused at the hearth, ladle in hand, and gave the faintest nod. "Yes, don't you get lonely?" Annie's innocent question carried more weight than she knew. Clara hushed her, embarrassment coloring her cheeks, but Cole surprised himself by answering, "You get used to it." Dinner was simple stew simmered from venison and potatoes, thick cornbread pulled from the iron pan. Cole set 3 bowls on the table without another word. Clara protested quietly. "We shouldn't, not after barging in like this." He sat down opposite her, gaze steady, voice gruff but calm. "You're here, you'll eat." For a time, only the crackle of the fire and the rattle of wind against the shutters filled the room. Annie ate eagerly, her small face brightening with each bite, and her chatter tumbled out like pebbles down a hill. She asked Cole about his horses, about whether he'd ever seen the mountains beyond the prairie, about why he didn't smile much. Clara flushed and tried to shush her, but Cole's rough features softened, just slightly, at the child's curiosity. He answered in short sentences, but he answered. Clara took careful spoonfuls, trying to ignore how her blistered hands ached against the rough wooden bowl. She caught Cole noticing, his eyes lingering on her raw knuckles before he turned back to his food. Shame pricked at Hershim for needing kindness, for sitting at another man's table. "We'll be gone in the morning," she said firmly. Though her voice lacked conviction, Cole only sipped from his cup, not arguing, not agreeing. Instead, he placed another slice of cornbread on her plate. When Annie began to tire, her head drooping against her mother's arm, Clara tried to stand. "She needs a place to lie down. We can take this stable again." Cole shook his head once. "The fire'll keep her warm here." He fetched a quilt from the cedar chest, laying it gently on the rug before the hearth. Clara lowered Annie down, tucking the child in, brushing hair from her forehead with tender fingers. The little girl sighed and drifted into sleep, the flames painting her face in soft gold. Silence stretched, heavier now. Cole leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. Clara sat across from him, hands folded tightly in her lap. At last, she spoke, voice low. "My husband, James, he died last spring. Horse through him, left debts I can't pay." Her words trembled, but her gaze held steady. Cole's jaw worked, the shadow of old grief flickering in his eyes. "My wife's been gone near 6 years," he said after a long pause. "Childbirth took her." After that, words seemed useless. The wind moaned against the cabin walls, carrying both their losses in its hollow song. In the flicker of lamplight, 2 strangers sat, bound by grief neither had chosen, neither could escape. Clara studied him, this man of silence, who had every reason to turn them out, but hadn't. Beneath the rough exterior, she glimpsed something steady, something kind. Cole, for his part, felt the unfamiliar pull of responsibility tugging at his chest. He watched the child sleep, her small breaths rising and falling beneath the quilt, and then he glanced at Clara, weary yet unbroken. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years, an ache not of loss, but of care. He told himself it was temporary, just one night. But as the fire crackled low and the storm outside deepened, Cole Walker knew his world had already shifted. The prairie days stretched long beneath an endless sweep of sky, each morning bringing Clara and Annie deeper into the rhythm of Cole Walker's ranch. What had begun as a single night's kindness lengthened into weeks, the unspoken arrangement quietly weaving them into the fabric of his life. Clara, humbled by the shelter he'd offered, insisted on working in return. Cole had only grunted at first, but he found himself leading her out each dawn, teaching her the ways of the land. The work was harsh for hands unaccustomed. Clara stumbled as she hauled water, nicked her fingers mending broken wire, and flinched when a horse snorted too close. But she never quit. Sweat clung to her temples, grit pressed into her palms, and yet each evening she stood straighter, more sure of herself. Cole found he respected her grit, her stubborn refusal to be pitied. One afternoon, he showed her how to patch a section of fencing that had sagged with time. She knelt beside him, trying to hold the posts steady as he hammered. Her hair slipped from its braid, brushing against her cheek, and he caught himself glancing too long before forcing his gaze back to the work. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Clara's lips curved with a tired but genuine smile. "Only because I have to be." Meanwhile, Annie brought life to corners of the ranch that had long sat in silence. She followed Cole across the pasture, peppering him with questions about every bird, every hoofprint. At first, his replies were little more than monosyllables, but the child had a way of tugging words out of him, like threads from a spool. She laughed at his dry humor, though half the time he hadn't realized he'd made a joke. Slowly, her laughter filled the cabin, smoothing edges that had grown sharp with years of solitude. Evenings carried a quiet rhythm, Clara stirring the pot on the stove, Annie setting the table with childish determination, Cole splitting wood outside until the sky bled with sunset. Over supper, silences stretched, but they were no longer strained. A glance across the table, the brush of a hand while passing a dish, small things, yet charged with meaning neither dared to voice. For Cole, the warmth creeping back into his life was both comfort and torment. He lay awake some nights staring at the rafters, remembering the gentle face of his wife, the laughter that once filled this same cabin. Guilt gnawed at him, whispering that to let Clara in was to betray a memory sacred. He carried it like a weight in his chest, even as his heart stirred with something dangerously close to hope. Clara wrestled with her own ghosts. She carried the memory of James, the husband who had left her not by choice, but by fate's cruel hand. She remembered the debts, the shame of losing everything, the nights when she'd wondered if Annie deserved better than a mother so broken. And now, with each passing day under Cole's roof, she questioned whether she had the right to feel this fragile flicker of belonging, to wish, quietly, for more. There were moments that nearly broke through the silence, brushing the horses side by side, their arms almost touching, Cole lifting her onto the saddle, his rough hands steady at her waist, a heartbeat longer than necessary, standing shoulder to shoulder on the porch as the sun melted into gold, neither speaking, yet both feeling the pull of something they couldn't name. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Annie curled up asleep between them, Clara murmured, "You've given us more than we deserve." Cole shook his head, eyes fixed on the flames. "Don't speak of deserving. Sometimes you just do what's right." Their gazes met, steady, searching. The words unsaid hung heavier than the words spoken. Outside, the prairie wind carried the scent of rain. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and restless, rolling across the open land. Cole rose to bar the shutters, his movements slow, thoughtful. Clara watched him, her heart tightening with an unnamed fear, as if the storm that brewed outside mirrored one rising between them, inevitable, powerful, and full of trial. That night, thunder rumbled in the distance, low and steady, promising that change was coming. Clara lay awake listening, Annie's soft breath warm against her arm, while in the next room Cole turned restlessly in his bed. Both carried questions they dared not voice, hearts caught between memory and the faint, fragile promise of something new. The storm would break, soon on the land, and within them, the trip into town came on a bright Saturday morning, the kind when wagon wheels rattled over dusty roads and voices drifted from Clara rode beside Cole in his wagon, Annie perched between them, chattering at the sight of everything new. For Clara, the bustle carried both relief and dread. She had been hidden away on the ranch for weeks. Stepping into town meant stepping back beneath the eyes of others. The stares began the moment her boots touched the boardwalk. Women paused mid-conversation, eyes narrowing. Men tipped hats, though some with a slowness that carried more curiosity than respect. A widow and her child under the roof of a cowboy, long thought. Heartless it was enough to stir gossip for weeks. At the mercantile, voices lowered as Clara entered with Annie's small hand in hers. One woman murmured, "That must be her." Another, sharper, whispered, "Living with him, already." Clara's spine stiffened, but she kept her chin lifted, answering their looks with quiet dignity. She had endured far worse than whispers. The banker stood at the counter, ledger in hand, his thin lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Harper," he said, voice edged with disdain, "I trust you haven't forgotten the debts your late husband left behind." Clara's throat tightened, but before she could answer, Cole stepped forward. His presence filled the room, voice steady but edged with steel. "That's enough." The banker blinked, retreating under the weight of Cole's gaze. Clara's heart beat fast, not only from fear, but from the unexpected warmth of his protection. It was at the general store counter that the moment came. Annie, tugging at Cole's sleeve for a piece of licorice, blurted it out, her voice clear and innocent. "Please, Pa." The word fell like a stone into still water, rippling through the room. Heads turned, silence stretched, broken only by the squeak of a rocking chair outside. Clara flushed hot, her hand tightening around her daughter's shoulder. "Annie," she whispered, mortified, but Cole only looked down at the little girl, his rugged face softening. Without hesitation, he ruffled her hair. "Go on, pick your sweet," he said simply. He neither confirmed nor denied the word, but his calm acceptance silenced the stares more than any denial could have. On the ride back, Clara's embarrassment lingered, her cheeks still warm. The prairie wind tugged at her bonnet, carrying the echo of that one word. She stole glances at Cole, who drove in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon. Annie sat between them, happily chewing on her candy, blissfully unaware of the storm she had stirred. That evening, when Annie had drifted off to sleep by the fire, Clara turned to him. "You didn't have to do that, to shield me from them." Her voice was soft but edged with gratitude. Cole's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "You and the girl belong here," he said simply. No grand speech, no flourish, just the plain truth as he felt it. Clara's breath caught. It was the first time he had spoken aloud what her heart had begun to hope. In the lamplight, the silence that followed was rich, not empty. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, afraid to let her feelings show too much. But inside, something fragile and long buried began to bloom. The sky gave its warning long before the storm arrived. Low clouds gathered on the horizon, black and heavy, rolling like restless cattle. The prairie wind turned sharp, rattling the shutters of Cole's ranch house. Clara stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the light fade. Annie, restless from being indoors, pressed her face to the glass dot. By dusk, the heavens split open. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled against the walls, and thunder rolled so deeply it rattled the very floorboards. Cole worked quickly, checking the barn, securing the horses, his slicker clinging to him as the storm drenched him to the bone. Clara tended the fire, adding wood, her hands trembling with every flash of lightning. "Stay close to me, Annie," she warned, but the child, curious and headstrong, darted toward the back door when the thunder eased for a moment. By the time Clara turned, Annie was gone. "Annie!" Clara's voice cut through the roar of the storm, panic slicing her chest. She flung open the door, rain slapping her face. The little girl's shape was faint in the distance, too close to the swollen creek that cut along the edge of the property. Cole didn't hesitate. He tore past Clara, boots pounding the mud. "Stay here," he barked over his shoulder, though she stumbled after him anyway. Annie, frightened now by the rushing water, tried to step back, but the bank crumbled. She slipped with a cry, plunging into the dark current. Clara screamed. The sound ripped away by the storm. Cole dove without thought. The cold water seized him, pulling hard, but his eyes locked on the small form flailing downstream. Muscles burning, lungs tight, he fought the current until his hand closed around Annie's arm. "I've got you," he shouted, though the river swallowed his voice. He hauled her against his chest, kicking hard, dragging both of them toward the bank. At last, he found footing, stumbling onto the mud-slick shore with Annie clinging to him, sobbing into his soaked shirt. Clara rushed forward, falling to her knees, wrapping her arms around her daughter, even as tears blurred her vision. Cole's chest heaved with effort, water dripping from his hat brim, but he didn't let go until Clara had Annie safely in her arms. For a moment, all three of them clung together beneath the raging storm. Back inside, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Annie finally fell into exhausted sleep. Clara sat beside her, trembling, her hands still shaking even as she smoothed her daughter's damp hair. When she looked up at Cole, the dam inside her broke. "I can't lose her," she whispered, her voice raw. "I've already lost everything once, my husband, our home. If Annie were taken to—" She choked, covering her mouth, the grief spilling out at last. Cole knelt beside her, his rough hand resting gently on her shoulder. For the first time, he pulled her into his arms. She sagged against him, her sobs muffled by the steady strength of his chest. He held her through it all, his silence more comforting than words could be. When her tears slowed, he spoke softly. "You're not alone anymore, Clara. Not in this fight. Not in any of it." She lifted her head, searching his face in the flicker of lamplight. There was grief, their lines etched deep, shadows that would never fully fade. But there was also something new, a promise. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a fragile calm took root. Clara realized she didn't have to carry her burdens by herself, not anymore. And Cole, holding her close, began to understand that love didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant giving the pain a place, shaping it into something with purpose. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. The prairie had just begun to recover from the storm when trouble found its way to Cole's ranch. The air was sharp and cold that morning, the kind that carried sound across miles of open land. Clara was hanging laundry, her hands still raw from work, when the steady crunch of hooves reached her ears. She froze, the sheet slipping from her grasp. On the horizon, A rider approached broad-shouldered, wearing a fine coat too polished for ranch work. Dust trailed behind his horse, his hat tilted low, his jaw sharp and unforgiving. Clara's stomach dropped. She knew him, Mr. Harlan, the debt collector. He reined in his horse by the fence, his gaze sliding over the ranch with the cold precision of a man already measuring what he planned to take. "Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice slick as oil, "you've avoided me long enough." Clara's throat tightened. Annie peeked out from the porch, wide-eyed, before Clara gestured sharply for her to go inside. The little girl obeyed, but not before clutching her mother's skirts in fear. Clara stood her ground, though her legs trembled. "My husband's debt died with him," she said, forcing strength into her words. Harlan smirked. "Debts don't die, ma'am. They get collected. That ranch of yours, or custody of the child, both make fine payment." The blood drained from Clara's face before she could answer. The stable doors swung open. Cole stepped out, broad-shouldered, a length of rope coiled casually in one hand, as if he'd been born holding it. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his presence filled the yard like a storm cloud rolling in. "That's enough." His voice was calm, steady, but there was no mistaking the edge of steel beneath. Harlan turned, sizing him up, his sneer faltering only slightly. "And you are?" Cole closed the distance, boots striking the dirt with deliberate weight. He stopped just short of Harlan's horse, his eyes unflinching. "The man who decides who stays on this land. And I'll tell you, plain no one lays a hand on Clara or her girl while they're under my roof." The silence stretched, heavy as a drawn gun. Harlan shifted in the saddle, his bravado faltering under the quiet authority in Cole's gaze. For a moment, the only sound was the wind tugging at the loose sheet on the line. Then, with a sharp tug on his reins, Harlan spat to the side and turned his horse. "This ain't the end," he muttered, but his retreat betrayed the lie. They watched until the rider disappeared beyond the ridge. Clara's knees threatened to buckle. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath until it left her in a shudder. Cole turned then, his expression softening as his eyes met hers. "You don't have to face men like that alone anymore," he said quietly. Her lip trembled, her strength at last giving way to the truth. She had been carrying more than she could bear, and in that moment she let the weight slip from her shoulders. That night, the house glowed with lamplight. Annie slept soundly in the loft, worn out from the day's excitement. Clara sat by the table, the golden light painting her features in warmth. Cole stood across from her, silent for a long while, wrestling with words that didn't come easy. Finally, he stepped forward, rough hand reaching for hers. His thumb brushed the back of her knuckles, gentle, steady. "Clara," he said, his voice low, steady as the prairie wind, "I've fought this feeling long enough. Stay, not just for tonight. Stay forever by my side." Her breath caught, eyes glistening as she saw not just the cowboy before her, but the man scarred, steadfast, offering her the very thing she thought she'd lost forever, a home. The weeks that followed seemed to breathe a new rhythm into the ranch, as if the land itself recognized the change. Where once silence ruled Cole's home, now laughter lingered in the rafters, carried on Annie's bright voice and Clara's gentle song. The days began with the clatter of pans in the kitchen, Clara humming softly as she stirred a pot of oats, Annie perched on a stool beside her. Cole, who had long grown used to mornings of black coffee and solitude, found himself pausing in the doorway, hat in hand, just to take in the scene. Life unfolded in small rituals. Clara took to tending the garden near the porch, her hands coaxing green shoots out of the dry soil, while Cole worked the horses. Annie followed him from pen to pen, chattering about everything and nothing, her small hands eager to help. Cole taught her how to hold the brush properly, guiding her movements with a patience that surprised even himself. Evenings were slower, quieter, but filled with a comfort Cole had never thought he'd feel again. After supper, Annie would curl against Clara's lap by the fire, eyes fluttering closed as the flames flickered. Cole often sat across from them, sharpening a knife or mending tack, though his eyes always strayed to the glow of Clara's face in the lamplight. Sometimes she'd catch him watching, and though words rarely passed between them, a smile would bloom soft unguarded, enough to stir something deep inside him. Their love grew not in sudden declarations, but in the quiet acts of living. When Clara's hands blistered from rope work, Cole pressed salve into her palm without a word. When Cole came in from a long day on the range, Clara left a steaming cup of coffee waiting on the table. At the hearth, two chairs that once sat apart now stood side by side. their closeness unspoken but undeniable. The townsfolk noticed the change. When Cole rode into Willow Creek with Clara and Annie, no one called him heartless anymore. Instead, they watched the way his hand brushed Clara's arm as she stepped down from the wagon, the way Annie perched proudly on his hip as though she'd been born there. Whispers gave way to nods of respect, even approval. Some still clucked their tongues, but the tide of gossip had turned. What they saw now was not scandal, but a family one built not by blood, but by choice. For Clara, the transformation was most profound within herself. She was no longer the weary widow clinging to scraps of hope. Each day on the ranch, each moment by Cole's side, renewed her. Her laughter rang truer, her shoulders carried less weight. She found joy in kneading bread, in hanging fresh laundry where the wind caught it. In the steady strength of Cole's presence just outside the window, she began to believe again, not in miracles, but in the quiet possibility of happiness. For Cole, peace came in the simplest of sounds, the patter of Annie's feet on wooden floors, Clara's voice reading softly by lamplight, the sigh of contentment when he settled into his chair with both of them near. The house that had once been a tomb of silence now pulsed with life, and though he carried scars that would never fully fade, he found that love did not erase grief, gave it purpose, weaving loss into something tender and enduring. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the prairie, Clara and Cole stood side by side at the fence line. Annie chased fireflies in the tall grass, her laughter bright against the hush of twilight. Clara's hand brushed against his, lingering this time. Cole turned, their eyes meeting, no need for words. In that glance, in that quiet touch, lay the promise of something unshakable. The cowboy's house had become a home, and in its warmth, three souls once fractured had bound themselves together, not with vows spoken aloud, but with the steady rhythm of a life shared. The sun dipped low, spilling molten gold across the endless prairie. Shadows stretched long over the waving grass. The sky brushed in strokes of crimson and lavender. From the porch of the ranch house, Cole sat in a wooden chair that creaked beneath his weight, his arm draped around Clara's shoulders. She leaned into him, her hand resting gently against his chest, where the steady beat of his heart told her all she needed to know. Before them, Annie darted through the tall grass, her laughter rising above the chorus of crickets. She chased fireflies with a mason jar in hand, her small figure glowing each time she caught a flicker of light. The prairie wind stirred her curls, carrying her giggles into the evening air until they seemed to belong to the land itself. Cole watched in silence, the weight of years pressing soft against his thoughts. He remembered the hollowness that had once ruled him, the nights when silence was his only companion, the mornings when grief rose heavier than the sun. He had believed himself finished with love, with hope, with belonging. Yet now, with Clara's warmth at his side and a child's laughter filling his home, the ache in his chest felt transformed. Not gone, never gone, but reshaped into something gentler. Clara's eyes glimmered in the fading light. Once they had been clouded with exhaustion, shadowed by loss. Now, though still marked by all she had endured, they shone steady and strong. She had faced the worst and survived, and here she stood renewed, not because she was rescued, but because she had found the courage to keep standing until she was met with steady hands, willing to hold her up. They spoke little, yet the silence between them was rich, full of meaning. Every brush of his thumb against her arm, every shift of her weight into his side, carried the language of trust. Words were unnecessary. The life they had built was spoken in shared chores, in the steady rhythm of days, in the laughter of a little girl who had brought them both back to life. Annie stumbled, then caught herself, her jar glowing faintly with captured light. She turned and waved, her grin wide, eyes shining even in the dusk. Cole lifted a hand in return, and Clara's smile deepened, her fingers tightening slightly where they rested on his chest. For the first time in years, Cole allowed himself to imagine tomorrow not as a burden, but as a promise. The prairie wind whispered across the land, brushing past the fence line, through the garden, over the worn boards of the porch. It carried with it the sound of family, Clara's soft sigh, Annie's bubbling laughter, and Cole's quiet exhale of peace as the sun sank beneath the horizon. Their silhouettes blended into one, cowboy, widow, and child. Three hearts once fractured, now joined not by grand declarations or sudden passion, but by the quiet grace of everyday love. The land stretched endless before them, the horizon wide and welcoming. Cole held Clara close, his voice low, almost reverent. "We're home," he said, and with the fireflies rising like scattered stars around Annie's laughter, it felt undeniably true.